An Ontario court ruling that Jordan Peterson can be forced to attend social media training demanded by the Ontario College of Psychologists over his past post criticizing gender ideology and climate change.
Jordan Peterson, at his best, is one of the most discussed public intellectuals in the world. With over millions of his books sold, Jordan is a clinical psychologist who has filled arenas with words of logic and intellectualism, and has had followers read his ideas like scriptures. Well, over the past few years, Jordan Peterson's image has been shifting in ways that even his most loyal supporters struggle to explain. Stay with me, because you're about to get more than just headlines on what happened to Jordan Peterson and how things seem to be going wrong for him. The legal battle he could not win. 2022 or 2018, it might be debatable when Jordan's fate was already in stone, when it was foreseeable that his exercise of freedom of speech would lead to a lawsuit that he would eventually lose. But I can tell you this: in 2022, the College of Psychologists of Ontario, a professional body that regulates licensed psychologists in that province, had ordered Peterson, a psychologist under their body, to complete a remedial social media coaching program. And this order would, unfortunately for Peterson, lead to an already lost court case that dragged on for years. Now, you may wonder why this order was made. Well, that's simple, because as far back as 2018, Jordan Peterson had made so many online posts that were considered unprofessional and damaging to the public confidence in the psychology profession. These particular lists concerned various topics and affected a range of individuals. For example, he had described a transgender Ottawa city councillor as an appalling, self-righteous, moralizing thing. Apart from this, he made offensive remarks about Elliot Page, an actor who had undergone gender-affirmative surgery. This remark and posts the college had deemed unacceptable, but Peterson thought was just a way of exercising his freedom of speech. Peterson had allegedly also responded to a post about overpopulation in a way that many people thought it interpreted to mean that he was encouraging dangerous behavior, something that outrightly goes against his profession. However, Peterson denied this interpretation as what he meant in that reply. Regardless of what he meant by those posts, the public perception and that of the college was that it was counterintuitive to his profession, and whether or not he maintained an active clinical practice, the college held that his conduct was unacceptable for a registered psychologist. As expected from a strong-willed and opinionated thinker like Peterson, he refused to comply with their order and instead filed a lawsuit against the professional body. He claimed that the order was a clear and obvious attack in his fundamental right to free speech, and that it was an attempt at re-education. He also painted the order to look like a political persecution of his ideologies instead of a professional regulation. Unsurprisingly, his supporters agreed with this. To them, it felt like an attempt to shut down a man who spoke their truth for them when they didn't have the platform to. In fact, Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre sided with him and called it government interference with free expression. While to his supporters this should have been an open and shut case in his favor, unfortunately for him, the courts at every level disagreed. From the Ontario Divisional Court to the Court of Appeal and even the Supreme Court, all of his attempts to rescind this order seemingly failed woefully. In fact, while his first two court cases were at least tried, but still ruled not in his favor, the Supreme Court of Canada refused to even hear the case, and honestly, that was saying something. After they had lost, his legal team announced that he would be attending the coaching program. However, this was not because his stance and views had changed, rather, because he had lost the cases and there were no legal alternatives, and so there was simply nothing else to do but comply if he was to remain registered. For a man who had built much of his public identity around standing up to institutional pressure, it was a very public defeat. If that chapter suggested things were getting more complicated for Peterson, what came next made it even clearer: why he left Canada. The cases he lost were perhaps just the beginning of things going south for Jordan Peterson. In December 2024, Peterson told the world that he had moved out of Canada, and he made this announcement on his daughter Michaela's podcast. He was now living in the same place as his daughter, Arizona. In the podcast, he made a passing comment saying that he had recently started getting around to naming his will's beneficiaries. And of course, for many listeners, this was a weird thing to say in public. Talk less of on a podcast, and as you would expect, media outlets ate this up. In fact, Global News picked up that story and reported his comments in full. As if to quell the listeners' curiosity, he was particularly very open as to why he was leaving Canada. And to be honest, he listed several reasons. First was the then still ongoing legal dispute with the College of Psychologists of Ontario. On the podcast, he described the whole situation as very annoying, which many listeners thought he was just putting it mildly. Another reason why he claimed to have left Canada was the introduction of Bill C-63. This was a proposed Canadian cyberbully bill that he believed would be used to suppress legitimate speech. After the court case with a body who tried to control his free online speech, it was no surprise he had an issue with the introduction of the bill. He predicted that Canada would become a totalitarian hellhole if the bill was to be passed. Apart from this, he called the federal government unbelievably incompetent and went on to call out the tax situation in the county, describing it as out of control. And then, when he was done going on these rants about Canada, like an afterthought, he mentioned that another reason he was moving was because he liked the weather in Arizona. However, even after going on his daughter's podcast, it appeared that the move raised way more questions than he gave answers to. Peterson was in fact still licensed to practice psychology in Ontario. Not only that, but he was an already established figure in Canada with deep roots in the country. Honestly, leaving and moving to Arizona did not solve the already present issues he had with the college. It only put a physical distance between himself and his troubles, including the legal battle which he had already lost. And for many people, his move had a symbolic weight. See, Peterson had a reputation, one which he had spent several years building. And this reputation? He was someone who was strong-willed and didn't back down. He told hard truths, no matter who was involved and where he was. He didn't care about the costs or consequences. He made it his personal goal to stand against institutional oppression. So it was no surprise that many people interpreted him leaving the country, especially during this legal dispute which he was clearly losing, as him retreating. However, not everybody thought this. Others believed he had made the right choice. Their defense was that Jordan was someone who had exhausted every legal option on a matter that affected his right, and he clearly saw no point fighting on and against a terrain that had turned against him. These two sides said so much about what people thought about this man and about the various issues he was raising. But the legal battles and the move to America weren't even the most striking part of the story. Something else was waiting in Arizona, and it had nothing to do with courts or politics. A health crisis that nearly killed him. Now, while Peterson's health issues became critical and were made public in 2019, it is important to note that it definitely did not start then. Instead, his health struggles went as far back as when he was a child. However, in 2019, it seemed things took a turn for the worse. He became terribly and severely addicted to benzodiazepines, a class of medications commonly prescribed for anxiety. It wasn't like he got his hands on them illegally. He had rightfully been prescribed this medication. However, he became addicted, and unfortunately, when his dose was increased, his dependence worsened sharply. The withdrawal he had to go through was just as brutal and painful as his addiction. And as if things couldn't get worse, it led to a condition called akathisia. Akathisia is a common condition in people going through withdrawals from addiction. It is an extreme and unbearable restlessness that affects people mentally. For him, it led to distressing thoughts, and it out an enormous strain on his relationship with his family. Like any caring family, his family were desperate to get him all the help he needed, and this desperation led to them sending him first to Russia and then to Serbia, where he underwent treatment for his withdrawal, including an induced trauma and a very lengthy stay in intensive care. As if things could not get any worse for Jordan Peterson, while he was hospitalized in Serbia in 2020, he contracted COVID-19. His recovery was slow, and his return to public life was gradual. When he came back, he seemingly did so stronger than he ever was before. None of his supporters, or even anyone in the public, had a reason to doubt it. He had released new books, he started a new podcast, and he was holding even bigger speaking tours. It looked like a comeback anyone would expect from a man like him. But in reality, and beneath the surface, and all of this, something was terribly wrong. And in August of 29-25, Michaela, his daughter, disclosed what it was. Peterson was diagnosed with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, a disease associated with the prolonged exposure to mold and biotoxins in the indoor air environment. Michaela explained that he had a genetic predisposition that caused his immune system to not recognize and eliminate mold and bacteria from his body, which is why he had food sensitivities, allergies, and other health challenges that had been present for years. The diagnosis was sparked after Peterson was exposed to mold when he was helping clean out his grandfather's house after he passed away. The consequences were harsh. The inflammation worsened to pneumonia and then to sepsis, and he was taken to hospital in an emergency. Peterson was in intensive care for nearly a month. His family said for the majority of September 2025, they could not talk to him at all. In an emotional video update in October 2025, Michaela said that the summer had been terrifying and that her father was near death. Also, doctors determined that the patient had critical illness polyneuropathy, a condition that damages nerves which can occur in patients who have been critically ill for long periods. By October 2025, he was removed from intensive care, but he was hospitalized until December, when he was released. His family said there was a lot of neurological inflammation and other problems going on that took a very long time to recover from, and that he's still seeing specialists for. Peterson was recovering at home in Arizona as of early 2026, when his daughter indicated there had been no further hospitalizations, but there was slow and uncertain progress. His podcast was on a hiatus. Several tour dates had been canceled. His daughter was running the online educational website that he had developed, the Peterson Academy. The picture of Peterson in hospital and not able to work had a distinct impact on a man who had been preaching for years on the importance of accepting responsibility, enduring suffering, and pressing forward regardless of setbacks. Meanwhile, another story was unfolding online, this time one very different from his battle for life, adding another twist to his public image. Come with me as I get right to why many people pointed fingers at Peterson and called him a fraud. The Phantom, the debate that went viral for all the wrong reasons. In May 2025, a few months before his health collapsed, Peterson appeared in a video on the Jubilee YouTube channel. The series is called Surrounded, and the format is simple. One person sits in the center of a room full of opponents and debates them one by one. The video was titled "One Christian versus 20 Atheists." Peterson was a Christian. Clips from the 90-minute discussion spread quickly on social media, and the reaction was not what Peterson's supporters would have wanted. The moment everyone latched onto involved a young atheist debater named Danny. He pointed out that the video had been framed as a Christian debating atheists and asked Peterson directly, "Are you a Christian?" "Look, I never said I was one," Peterson replied. When Danny pushed further, Peterson said whether he was a Christian or not was a private matter he had no obligation to declare. The exchange ended when Peterson cut it off before it could go any further. Shortly after, the title of the video was quietly changed to "Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists." The clip of that exchange has since been watched more than 7 million times. Even among viewers who had previously been sympathetic to Peterson, the consensus was that he looked evasive and unprepared. His critics had a field day. Here was a man who had built a significant part of his public identity around religious themes, who had written a book called "We Who Wrestle with God," who attended Catholic Mass with his wife, and who had told The Spectator in January 2025 that he was a new kind of Christian, and yet when asked directly, under no particular pressure, in a YouTube debate, he wouldn't say so. Conservative commentator Candace Owens, who had largely been aligned with Peterson on cultural issues, used the moment to raise a concern she had voiced before. On her podcast, she pointed out that Peterson was always talking about God without ever quite saying the word himself, and asked plainly, what does he actually believe? Newsweek covered the fallout, drawing reactions from across the political and religious spectrum. As of this video, Peterson has not responded publicly to the debate or the criticism it generated. The exchange added another layer to an already complicated picture, one that now included a lost legal battle, a move out of Canada, a near-fatal illness, and a public moment of evasion on the question that sits at the center of his entire intellectual brand. And unlike most controversies, this one came with a view count that made it impossible to dismiss. Which brings us to the only question that really matters at this point. What does any of this mean for someone who, not that long ago, was one of the most influential public voices in the world? What all of this adds up to? Jordan Peterson's story over the past few years is not a straightforward one to tell. His supporters frame it as a tale of cancellation and persecution. His harshest critics want it to be the unmasking of a fraud. Neither version is quite right, and the truth is more complicated and, in some ways, more interesting than either. The legal fight with the College of Psychologists was never going to go his way. Courts don't override professional licensing bodies on free speech grounds when those bodies are enforcing their own conduct standards. The law was not on his side from the beginning. What the years of litigation through every court level actually did was extend a loss that had been visible early on. But the fight gave Peterson a cause, and that cause served him well with his audience for a long time. The move to America came out of that defeat, alongside genuine concerns about the direction of Canadian law and a personal situation that had grown increasingly uncomfortable. Whether it reads as a principled rejection of a country heading the wrong way, or as a man stepping away from a fight he had already lost, depends entirely on how you see Peterson and what you think he stands for. That divide is itself a story about how his public image has fractured. The health crisis sits apart from all of that. It has nothing to do with politics or public argument. It is simply the story of a man who has battled his own body for years, and who, in 2025, came closer to death than most people have wanted to acknowledge. The slow recovery, the canceled shows, the extended absence, have left a silence where there used to be a very loud and very constant presence. Whether Peterson returns to anything close to his previous level of influence is still an open question. The viral debate matters less because he lost it, and more because of what losing it revealed. Peterson had entered that conversation on familiar ground, in front of an audience that expected him to be formidable. He left it outmaneuvered by a single challenger on a question he had been circling for years. Does he actually believe what he has been implying? For the people who had followed him, not just for his ideas, but for his willingness to say difficult things plainly, that moment cut deeper than any court ruling. Peterson built his public identity around resistance to institutional power, and that identity works best when the fight is ongoing and the outcome is uncertain. It holds less weight when the court has ruled, when the country has been left behind, when the body has failed, and when a YouTube debate has exposed an evasion at the center of his most important theme. That is not necessarily the end of the story. Peterson has come through hard stretches before, but the situation is more complicated now than it was 2 years ago, and the things that have been going wrong show no clear signs of turning around. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.